Welcome to the Internet Chess Club. Checkmate.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another video on the Alapin variation. We had basically the first part of what we're going to see today already on the previous video, and we discussed those types of positions. Take on d4, and we looked at knight c3 and bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b5, and here we discussed basically many other moves to avoid capturing on e5. And the reason was, I said, and we can see some of the positions actually today, that d takes e5 is leading to drawish positions in just many games. So we saw some plays bishop d7, very strong players, Grichuk, Morozevich, Topalov had a game with d5, a6, which I find it not that easy to like this move, but some very strong players do like it. Let's look quickly what happens after simply take on e5. Why real strong players try to avoid it against weaker players. If two 2700 players are playing, yeah, no problem. But if there is 200-300 points, they don't play this line. Bishop d7 is quite forced. And here, okay, white can simply take on d7. I'm not going to discuss this. I don't believe in this move much. Simply queen takes and then e6, and white at best maybe have some compensation for his isolated d-pawn, but nothing to think about white being better there. So white is playing another system, taking on c6. Black doesn't want to be left with a weak bishop on d7, so black will capture with the bishop. And here we have a very principal position. White has his weak d4 pawn, and black has his weak c6 pawn. White can castle in one move. Black needs 3 moves to castle. Pawn moves either way, bishop moves somewhere, and then a castle. So strategically, black should be absolutely okay. It's just tiny bit behind in development. So castle would make the most sense for white, and is actually the main move. If white just plays knight c3, then black really is faced with absolutely no problem. For example, g6, castle, bishop g7, bishop e3, castle, and black is very okay. Rook e1, knight d5 was a game between Pep 10 against Grichuk. Pep 10, one of the strongest women in the world. Grichuk, one of the strongest men. But at that time, they were both somewhat weaker. It's in Bill 1999. And some other moves have been possible, but really no problem at all for black. Castle g6. Queen c2, black simply played rook c8 and bishop g7. This was a game between Moser against Misija, 2004. Black was easily okay and won. So rook e1, this seems like the most logical idea. We just said 2 minutes ago. White will have faster development. He will try to use it. So bishop g7 is met with bishop g5. And this is basically the critical position. What should black play here? Well, defending the pawn on e7 seems like an obvious move, right? Either playing knight d5, which makes most sense, or maybe playing a move such as knight c8, but those are really the moves that make sense here. I think that the new move is actually the one that changed the evaluation of this position. When I say new move, I mean, well, it wasn't that popular up until 15 years ago, which is just castle. First of all, let's start. Knight d5 is possible, but the idea is after knight c3, the knight on d5 will be taken and the e7 pawn will become under attack. Maybe queen a4 immediately, followed by knight c3. White is immediately attacking black weak spots. Knight c8 is indeed possible and quite okay for black. I mean, it's not like I'm not even sure that black is worse here. For some reason, theory thinks that white might be somewhat better. For example, queen f3 was played in some games, castle, and here white took on c6. Knight c3, just developing in that way, might be a better try. After queen c6, rook b8, it's clear black is going to get one of the pawns back immediately. And this was a game Gurieli against Sorokin, Dubai, 2005. The game ended in a draw and black is clearly okay. Another not far away game from that was queen a4, castle, and now white played knight c3. Queen takes c6, rook b8 will transpose. Queen b6 was played, rook b8 is of course a possibility. Rook a d1, with an unclear position, but black is very much okay. This was De Vita against Sachs, Porto, San Giorgio, 1995. So knight c8 may be somewhat better for white. Like I'm tiny bit moving my face, but I do think that black doesn't have any real winning chances. Let's put it this way, if white plays solid. And this explains why all those 2400 playing white against 2700, why the 2700 try to avoid. Because if the castle is maybe theoretically the easiest way for black to equalize, and after capture, this is the big idea. But how can black really try and win this position? Well, let's just see a few examples, but they are all very, very much the same story. Knight c3 may be the best chance for white. If white can fully organize his pieces, yes, maybe he has some potential against the c6 pawn. But the b2 pawn is just too quick and too fast. Alright, so let's first of all try and see exchanging queens. Knight d2, rook fb8. This was a game between Becerra Rivero against Wang Zili in Yerevan Olympiad 1996. The game ended in a draw, but already here black is at least equal, probably tiny more. Knight c3, rook fe8. And again, not easy what to do against this weakness. And actually here black found himself just much better. This is a game Novak against Palats in Pola 2000. Black didn't even grab the pawn, just wanted to prevent check on f6. So knight c3 immediately. And here there are several easy possibilities. For example, rook e8, queen f3, queen d7. And again, bishop f6 is by far the most logical move, just stopping this beast. If bishop c5, then simply it's the same story. Black is just better here. This was, for example, a game after rook a d1, queen e6, Rodanic against Palats in 1995. Palats, a strong grandmaster, plays this Alapin variation a lot with the white pieces and with the black, so very important to see what he's playing. One of the leading grandmasters playing those lines. So we were at queen f3, queen d7, bishop f6, maybe here's something tiny bit for white. Take, and queen d2. Not too much, but maybe possible after king f1 for white to have some initiative. This is Brynel against Hellers, 1994. But if black even doesn't want to try and get this position, he can simply exchange queens right away. and then play. So, if black doesn't want to go to this position we just mentioned before, he can simply exchange queens first, and then play rook f8. And this was played by strong players, for example, Reagan against Dorian already in 1978, although this line became really popular basically in the last 15 years. The white played here king f1, knight c4, rook d7. Dorian played f5. Dorian, one of the strongest Hungarian players at that period before the Leko Almasi, Judith Polgar period. And he played here f5, but knight takes b2 or rook a b8. Definitely black is slightly better. Maybe still draw, but black is not in any danger here. So bishop c5 after rook f8. And here is the thing, how to do anything. Let's say that you are Morozevich, incredibly strong player, and against you just an okay grandmaster, 2500. It doesn't matter, if you cannot do magic, black cannot really win at this position if white, keeps being reasonable. For example, knight c4, take on a take, and not really too much here for white. This is Ravi against Timoshenko, 2004. For example, another way maybe capture immediately on e8 and knight c4. And also here, the pawn up is just very temporarily, no real dramatic chances for black to do anything with his extra pawn. For example, if a5, I just assume white is going to take the c pawn, rook a6. This is not really a way for black to play. So that was a drawish game. Mashiavsky against Sveshnikov, Varsha 2005. So, to summarize this entire idea, basically the reason why we see many of the players play the way they play, they want to avoid those type of drawish position. If you're a black player, I can tell you, when I was black, this is the line that I was playing, d takes e5 and g6, and, well, hoping that white is not 400 points weaker than you and just trying to make a draw. Okay, so with this we basically conclude bishop b5, which used to be maybe the main line. How about a new idea? Bishop b3. It's a very original idea. White is going to actually sacrifice the pawn and try to get compensation. The main line to see is d takes e5, d5. But what about d5? This is a very interesting move. Black's idea is very simple. He wants to play bishop out and then play e6, having a super French position or something like the Caro-Kann with bishop out, but very, very nice way. There is a move here that was played by some very, very strong players, and Pavasovich played this, Vallejo beat Carlsen in this line, but it was first played by a reasonable player, okay, let's say a reasonable player, in 1995. And I'm laughing, so I won't, and that reasonable player is me. There is a very interesting move here that I'm quite proud of, because I think it's the best move, and now it is a standard in this position. But up until 1995, it wasn't played much. I played a game against today another Israeli grandmaster, Shmuter, and he played d5. I have to stop those moves. There is only one move that can do it, knight h4. Gaining control of both of those squares. My opponent played e6. Let's first see some other alternatives. For example, knight c4, knight c3. And here very tricky. If a6, white has a superb move, just superb one. e6. If bishop takes, this is losing immediately. If pawn takes queen h5, it looks very nasty even considering this idea. And after knight d6, this is just about game over. Sorry, knight take. This is just about game over. Pavasovic against Miladinovic. Very strong grandmasters. Nova Gorica 2003. Some other plays in this position were, for example, a5, but just this simple play, of course the pawn cannot be taken that way. But simply bishop c2, and it seems that white is just better here. And after e6, white played g3, but maybe the simple knight f3 and look at the difference on the light-colored bishop would give white an advantage. This is Yagupov against Ragozin in 1992. A very interesting move is actually g6. Hasn't been played much, but one very interesting possibility. On one hand, developing, but on the other hand, keeping this diagonal available. So, after e6, which move to play here? I played a very simple move. Knight f3. Very important to emphasize this. One move only for black to block his bishop, and now back. Some other players played g3 after. This is a game from Rausis in 2006. But knight f3 seems, in my opinion, the most principal move. White gave two moves away, but this guy on c8 is in a big problem. For example, bishop b4 is one idea played by Alexeyev in Vikan Z 2005. Maybe bishop d2 is a possibility. His opponent played knight c3, knight a5. And complicated game, although I think white is somewhat better here just after castle. Bishop d7 is the move that seems to be played by most. Knight c3. And my opponent played bishop e7. Rook c8 was played by Carlsen. This is a game he played against Vallejo. Castle. h6. Well, white is going to play on this diagonal quite clear, so maybe h6, tiny bit weakening this diagonal too much. Now g6, and white found himself just better. Well, actually, Vallejo first played bishop to c2, and the knight goes to f4, and it's clear that white's pieces all of them are aiming towards the king. Black king is somewhat in trouble. This was a game in 2004 which Vallejo won with the white pieces. Probably today much more difficult to do it against Carlsen. After bishop e7, I played immediately bishop c2. Also possible is just castle, not huge difference. We can see another game, a5, a3, knight a7, bishop e3, and avoiding exchanges. White has more space, so avoiding exchanges would seem a very logical idea. Vaizhin against Pavalov, Kiev 2006. Other possibilities, let's say just castle, bishop c2, f6, and here either queen d3 right away. This was played in Filipovich-Lazarev 2003. The game was very quick draw, but maybe somewhat better for white, or this seems like a reasonable idea, and white should be tiny bit better here. Pavasovic against Herceg, Greece 2008. So, After bishop e7, bishop c2, knight c4, castle. There is a reason why my opponent didn't play rook c8 and didn't castle. He's thinking about playing long castle. And that's exactly what he did here. And I very much wanted to play b3, but how to protect against this move? So after the very powerful queen d3, black is just in big trouble. Not easy to prevent those threats, and if knight b4, simply capture and bishop g5 and white is winning. So my opponent went on this way, but his position is very difficult here and I won this game quite quickly. This was Harvey against Schmuter from Israel 1995. And that was basically, if my chess base is correct, the first time that, let's say, grandmaster or close to a grandmaster, I believe I became grandmaster this year, played this idea. Knight h4 and knight back. So I still think this is the most powerful idea for white. So if d5 not working, we have to look at capture and then d5. Now here there are basically, it is interesting. Knight a5 is almost the only move that theory deals with. But there is another move which is very interesting, and we're going to see some amazing position. Knight b4 actually seems even a simpler move. Knight c3, and now just playing e6. Quite a simple idea. Black just wants to immediately go after the d5 pawn. White has several moves in this position, but clearly bishop g5 seems like the main one. And f6. This move is possible. It was considered impossible, but somewhere in the early 2000s, some players found ways to play here for black. First of all, what about bishop e7? Take. Looks absolutely okay for black. Pavasovic against Volzin, Budapest, 1995. So, f6. Why is this move so wrong? Or was thought to be wrong? Knight takes e5. Capture and queen h5. g6. Take. And queen takes rook. Taking on g6 is not gonna work because of, king d7. And this is good enough. So white grabs the rook on h8. And here there are several possibilities. First of all, knight takes d5. This is Valasov against Grebinkin from 2004. This is one very interesting possibility. Valasov plays several of those games were Valasov's games. Another move, knight to d3, king f1 and pawn takes d5. This is another game of Valasov, this time against Shapushnikov. The game went rook d1 and bishop f5. And what a position, but black seems to be quite okay here. This was 2002. So then queen d4, quite a new move. And here the critical move that needs to be analyzed is knight to c5, with very complicated position. In the game, black, and after h4, played another quite wrong move. King f7 was one of the possibilities, and here just found himself under too many pins and threats. Pavasovic against Kornosov, Istanbul 2003, and White won this game quite quickly. So night before, there is a lot of space there that is not explored and really unclear. Many, by the way, I'll say it in general, many of those lines with bishop b3 are yet to be fully analyzed and not even fully, I mean, are yet to be deeply analyzed. Let's put it this way. So this is some place to, if you have energy and want to surprise your opponent, to try and look for some stuff. Okay, so going back to knight a5. Knight c3 has to be played. And here there are many possibilities for both colors, and especially here for black. Knight takes b3 is one of the main possibilities, but also simply keeping the pawn right away is a possibility. Castle g6, bishop e3, bishop d7 with rook c8 is a possibility. Cermak against Filipov, Bled 2001. Bishop g7. This seems a very possible way to play. d6 is an interesting way for white, but black should be just okay just by capturing. Knight b5, 2 pawns down, but all white's pieces are in play, all of them, while black cannot really say the same. But after queen c6, this is basically white's idea, but black should be scared, but he's okay, and just play this way. This was Pavasovic against Fedorov, 2003. Black seems very okay here. So this was the immediate aggressive d6. Some other moves have been played here. For example, bishop c5, trying to play d6 but not give the pawn completely. Bishop g4, and here, for example, after h3, capture and castle. Sorry, before that, of course, castle is wrong because of take and check. So Gelfand with the black pieces does see those things quite easily. And after rook fd1, queen d7, the game very soon ended in a draw, actually, on the next move or two, but it is very, very unclear position. This is Pavasovic against Gelfand from 2001. There are so many other possibilities here, but the clear idea is that white has some strong initiative, black holding the pawn and trying to see who wins. Another way is quite simple way to play, and it also can transpose after knight takes b3 and then g6, is just this way. I believe that keeping the knights is more flexible than immediately capturing. Castle, bishop f5, rook e1, rook c8. Black seems to be quite okay. This is a very, very recent game. Howell against Niebuhr, Vikan Z 2009. It's interesting to see such a strong young player as Howell playing this line, despite the fact that generally I think black has many resources to be okay here. Said all that, Howell won this game in quite a convincing style. Another idea I'll just mention briefly is immediately playing bishop g4, although I'm not a huge fan of this move right away. Bishop e3 is possible, and here this position just, I believe, gives white more than enough compensation for his pawn. A4, in my opinion, is the critical move to consider. A pawn down, double isolated pawns, but okay, what are the important factors in this game? Development and black's king. Bishop g5, maybe a5, and targeting this pawn. And I believe white should have at least okay compensation here. In the game, white chose another plan and just had some positional play. I'm not sure if this is the way I would go, but it worked for white. Pavasovic against Saric just played probably a couple of months ago in Slovenia, 2009. White won this game. So we're going to the main line. Take on b3, queen takes b3, and g6 is definitely a possibility, which we mentioned. f6 is also a possibility here, but if so, maybe it would have been better to try and play them just a move ago, not give white quite a good place. So the very main move is actually e6. Black basically saying, okay, I don't want to be, if black plays this way, I don't want to try and keep the pawn. I don't want to try and keep, fighting, being a pawn up, but letting you have all the initiative. Just give me, I just want to release the tension in the center and get my pawn back. I actually think it's a very reasonable statement for black, because he can, for most of it, actually do it. Knight takes e5 is the very main move, but this position is still somewhat tricky. If castle, just take on d5 should be just very okay for black, but still possible to look. For example, in this position, suddenly white has some initiative. Jurokovic against Trzaskowski in 2004. But bishop g5 is a very interesting move, a truly very interesting move. Bishop e7 seems to be the main reply after it. Clearly there are other moves that deserve attention. f6, in my opinion, is the first thing that, the first variation white should calculate. Can he capture on e5, capture on e6 and play long castle and then capture on e6? But another move is maybe queen d6 right away. But the most solid bishop e7 also seems to be very okay for black. Well, white should probably try and take on e7 and somehow try to go for a draw here, because after rook d1, now it is just somewhat trouble for white here. It is very tricky not to take on g5, and this is why some players like to play those variations, because if the opponent is not prepared enough, it can be a very easy win, as was in the game I'm about to show you. Take on e6, queen e7, take on g5. And here the best is for black to go to an endgame when he's just slightly worse, but, well, basically this is not so much. After queen e6, well, black will have tiny bit weak pawn, but this was played in Octonic against Newman 1996, and white won, but not too much. But why not just to take the knight? Well, this was played by Mate, and I have to tell you, I've seen so much chess in my life, but seeing that name when playing chess is very cool. It was starting 30 seconds of being foolish and ridiculous here, starting to have in my head, coming to a table, my name is Mate, checkmate, and all those things around. So I'm not offending the guy, maybe he's a great one, but a great name for a chess player, Mate. Alright, but actually in this position he was very much checkmated. After queen b5. He played king f8, but also king e7 is very bad after this continuation. The king is dead here. You can turn your Ripka on and look at it if you want. And after knight e4, check, king went back, and this was just the end of the game. Actually, believe it or not, but mate got checkmated here. He resigned after this. Okay, so no more checkmates jokes. And going to simply pawn takes d5. And if knight takes d5, now simply this is better for black, no questions about this Oktonic against Ironikov. Same player playing this with the white. This is in 1994. And taking immediately is no big difference. Still, black is just incredibly solid. Pep against Voskovich in 2004. So, not very convincing line for white, which we have to go to knight takes e5. So after knight takes e5, what are black's possibilities here? There are basically, I would say, three main possibilities. We're going to deal with them a little bit because some of them are, I can make a series on just some of them, or at least on one of them we can have two videos just on. The first one is very simply knight takes d5. And what is this position? It is known that take on c3, this position is just much better for white. This is well known. The king is in the center and the rook is under attack. No questions here. But black has about many ways to play better than that. For example, even immediately queen c8. And white might try to claim he's better in this position due to the isolated d-pawn. This looks in some way like the variation in the Panov exchange. Only their white pawn is on f3. Very similar endgame is reached there. But objectively, it should be very, very close to a draw. This is, for example, was Fontaine against Nataf in 2005. The game ended in a draw. Some other possibilities if black doesn't want to feel his tiny worth. For example, playing bishop b4. And now after bishop d2, it is possible to play this way when black just seems okay. Vyushin against Miroshinchenko, Istanbul, 2006. And there are other ways, like if white doesn't play bishop d2. For example, after knight takes d7, extremely powerful move here for black immediately. But queen c8, what a move. Basically, we're forced to exchange queens. The knight cannot go much. I mean, probably just this move immediately is okay. Maybe even knight takes. Actually, yeah, knight takes also might be simply possible, but rook take seems like most impressive one. And this was played in Lautia against Tregubov, Reykjavik, 2003. So knight takes d5 immediately seems possible. Maybe slightly worse for black, but not really too much. Bishop d6. This is actually, in my opinion, a very interesting variation. We will see it can transpose to similar way. Queen b5, king e7, king f8. If king e7, taking here might look somewhat better for white. Black is solid, but still, king on e7 is still king on e7. So this is somewhat annoying. The king actually on f8 is somewhat better, because now white's pieces are not very well coordinated and black can try and pressure them with the queen being not in the right place. Therefore, white doesn't take on e6 but actually play Knight f3 is one move, take on d5, castle and bishop g4. White, pawn down, clearly black king somewhat not well placed. This is Smerdon against Li Kwang Lam in Beijing 2008. Very, very recent game. It was almost 2009 when it was played. And black won this one and seems to be quite okay here. And very interesting line to analyze. The main line is not far away from that. Pawn takes and bishop e3, bishop d6. This is basically the entire idea of bishop b3 is something like that position. And now queen b5 check, where the idea is that after bishop d7, take, and very powerfully long castle might give white, said all that, maybe slightly better position. After, for example, queen takes b5, knight takes b5, king d7, but sometimes slight advantage is enough. And maybe rook take here is possible for tiny advantage. This was played in Ivanov against Krivinchov in Moscow 1994. The game ended in a draw. After rook d1, Bobby Fischer moved bishop take h2 may be possible here, but black played this way. And white is slightly better here. Pavasovich, we mentioned this guy a lot, a 2600 player, very strong player playing this line, and against Panchenko in Pola 2001. So, well, to say if there is much for white, I think black can draw this one, but this is one of white's ideas. And after rook d8, king b1 proved to just give white quite a substantial advantage. Here it is quite clear to see white is much better. This is Rausis against Karukapa, Riga 1995. And for example, going back to our original position, which is very tricky one, but I believe today black knows very easily how to be okay. Knight d7 is very dangerous. After knight takes f7, queen takes d5, and here just simply long castle, knight f6, and queen g5. Velasov, we also mentioned him several times, against Ostanchenko, Moscow 1996. White is just better here. Huge pressure on the d file and the g7 square. For example, after king f7, knight b5, just getting back some material. Okay, so what after queen b5? So far everything looks horrible, or at least tiny worse. King f8, very similar to bishop d6 and king f8 we mentioned before. There are quite many games of Van Velde in this line, but many other players, Cermak against Sveshnikov in several occasions, and I'm just going to touch it very briefly because it's just a huge line. Charbonneau against Lassiège, two strong Canadian players played this in Montreal 2000. Let's look at one or two examples from Van Velde games. Knight f3, bishop d7. Another possibility is bishop e6, castle and h6, bishop e6, castle, h6. Also f6 was possible. This was Freycinet against Nataf in 2003. h6, rook a d1. No question white has compensation. Whether it is enough to win the game, I don't think so. This was Cermak against Tartar 2000, but definitely active players would like to play this with white, and that's why this is a very, very interesting variation. Bishop d7, Queen d3, Queen b3 is also possible, was played in Pavasovic Halikas in 2003. And here, an interesting move by Van Velde is Knight a4. Queen b6 was also played before and seemed okay for black, but Van Velde may be trying to actually win this with the black pieces. This is Fresinet against Van Velde, Moscow 2003. The game ended in a draw and black seems definitely okay. Instead of Knight f3, if we go back a little bit, another major possibility here, maybe the major possibility, which I'll just touch it very briefly, is actually long castle. And no, I'm not mistaken. The knight on e5 cannot be taken, or at least after knight takes d5, white has tremendous attack. Just seems like this is not the way that black should be playing this game. For example, if just take back, rook take, queen c7 is strongly met by simply bishop c5. And if bishop d6 right away, white has several interesting possibilities. Bishop c5 also taking on b6 is one of them, because now after take on b6 again, rook takes d6 would be possible because of bishop c5. So black doesn't really capture on e5. He plays bishop e6, and here there are several, many possibilities. For example, after f4, Van Velde played simply capture on e5 and h6. This is a game against Van der Werf in Vikhanzi in 1995, which Van Velde won with the black pieces in 71 moves. There are too many possibilities here to deeply analyze, but we can conclude what we have looked today. We started with the bishop b5 and take on e5, which easily okay for black, but no real winning chances. Then we looked at bishop b3, d5, knight h4 is a very powerful idea. And after capture, which is a very dynamic way, d5, knight b4 is not played much, but clearly a very interesting possibility. We have seen some very interesting lines with e6. And the main move, knight a5, leads to many possibilities, starting from f6, g6, bishop g4, and also just the simple capture and now e6, which all seems to be very tricky but very okay for black. With this, we basically end our line of capturing on d4, and now we should start a new mini topic in our series of bishop c4 right away, and then bishop to b3. For this one, there's going to be a next video. Take care.